welcome back. My name is Morgan. This is my channel, Pisces Paperbacks, and today I'm going to be doing my July wrap-up. I am so excited to be talking to you about these books today because if my counting is correct, and I've gone back and looked through my spreadsheets, I think that July was my best reading month ever, both in quantity of books and quality, like how much I liked them. Like, I read 20 books. I've never gotten to 20 before. I've gotten to 19 3 times since I started tracking my reading, which was probably in 2019. So it's only been about 4 years, but I've never gotten to 20, and I did. And I really, really loved a lot of these books. So we might as well just get started. The first book I finished this month was Easy Beauty by Chloe Cooper Jones. I gave it 4 stars. This is a memoir about motherhood and disability and identity and philosophy. And while I really did like it and thought it was very interesting and had interesting things to say, I do think it wasn't the most easily written for people to understand. So if you are just like picking up a memoir for the first time, I don't know if this is like the one to go to, but I did enjoy it. Next I read Home Field Advantage by Dahlia Adler. This is a YA contemporary sapphic romance between a cheerleader and the quarterback, and I really, really enjoyed this. I gave it 4.5 stars. This story follows Jack and Amber. Jack is the quarterback replacing the high school's previous quarterback who passed away in a car accident. So not only is she replacing like this person who has been idolized because of how they died, but also, you know, the position they had in the school before their death, she's also a girl. So she's taking his spot, and it's like in the South in a more conservative area. Amber is on the cheerleading team. She really wants to be captain next year when she's a senior, but she doesn't really know how to put herself out there as someone who would be great for a leadership role. Jack asks Amber to help her try and get the football players and the cheerleaders to be a little bit nicer and accepting of her because she's being pretty brutally bullied. Not physically, but just like really, really rude to her. And Amber is like, this is a chance to be seen as a leader. I will kind of spearhead the effort to foster community amongst the sports people at this high school. And then obviously they develop feelings for each other. I really, really enjoy secret relationship or like hidden relationship trope. So this was like so good. Next I read books 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the Big Bad Wolf series by Charlie Adhara. I've talked a lot about these books. I feel like, I don't know, maybe I have, maybe I haven't, but I feel like I have, especially my most recent video, which was recommending underhyped romances. So instead of getting super detailed about the plot of each of these individual books, I will say that the synopsis of the series is that it is a paranormal romance following Cooper Dayton, an FBI agent who investigates crimes committed by werewolves, and Oliver Park, a werewolf who is also an agent, kind of helping with this investigation that they're doing. And the books in the series follow their relationship through several different murder investigations that they happen to get involved in. Here's what I rated each of the books that I read this month. I rated book 2, The Wolf at Bay, 4 stars. Book 3, Thrown to the Wolf, I gave 5 stars. I think this one's also my favorite, but I'm not sure. I'll have to reread them someday. Book 4, Wolf in Sheep's Clothing, I gave 5 stars. And Cry Wolf, book 5, I gave 4.5 5 stars. This one I really, really loved because I love the characters, but I'm a little bit iffy on the actual mystery. I definitely think that this series is greater than the sum of its parts, with each of the individual books not being like that amazing, but as a whole it's something that I'm going to love for forever. I can just tell. Next I read all 4 books in the Heartstopper graphic novel series. This is an adorable YA contemporary romance graphic novel series that follows Nick and Charlie. Charlie is a year younger than Nick, and he is out as gay at school, but he has been bullied for it in the past, especially by some of the rugby boys, of which Nick is one of them. But when they have a class together, they become really good friends, and Nick starts to develop feelings for Charlie, and he's never had feelings for a boy before, so it's kind of like a self-coming out, self-realization for him, as well as just the development of their absolutely adorable relationship. And I read all 4 in one day and loved them. I gave volume 1 4.5 stars, volume 2 5 stars, volume 3 5 stars, and volume 4 4 stars. The 3rd and 4th books in this series deal more heavily with Charlie's mental health issues that he is dealing with, especially the 4th book, in which it really discusses a lot about his eating disorder. I think that Alice Oseman handles this topic with a lot of grace, but that is something to be aware of when you go into especially the 3rd and 4th books. Next, I read the Heartstopper Yearbook, which is a kind of non-fiction behind-the-scenes look at Alice Oseman's development of the graphic novel series. A look a little bit at how she created the webcomic that the series is based on in the first place, as well as mini comics and some fun character profiles and new original drawings of the characters. I really enjoyed this. I thought it would be a little bit more like one-shot mini comics, like a collection of short stories about the characters, rather than what it was, which is a little bit more just like graphic nonfiction. You know what I mean? But I still really enjoyed it. I love looking at the pictures and I love the characters, so like I'm not complaining. I gave it 4 stars. Next, I read Truth and Measure and Above All Things by Roslyn Sinclair. This is the Carlisle series. It is a sapphic contemporary romance between an older woman and her assistant, and it is very clearly inspired by The Devil Wears Prada. So Vivian is a demanding and exacting editor of a fashion magazine, and Jules is her very competent assistant. And the story kind of kicks off when Vivian, who is in the middle of a divorce, realizes that she's pregnant, and Jules is like the only person who knows and helps her and takes care of her and is attentive, and they kind of have a bond that grows out of that. Prior to this happening, they have a very standard boss-assistant relationship. The first book is more about them developing these feelings and thinking about whether or not it'd be a good idea for them to get together, especially with the relationship they have. Vivian is very aware that she is Jules' boss and she does not want to take advantage of her. The second book is like they are in a relationship, and it's more dealing with the social fallout of the type of relationship that they do have, since there is a 16-year age gap between them. Jules is also 26, so she's not straight out of college, just to be clear. But I ended up really not loving these books as much as I wanted to. I got them from a recommendation on Twitter where someone was like, if you're looking for sapphic romances that have really, really good smut and also really good character development, like there's nothing better than this. And I have to say, I really didn't particularly like the sex scenes or the character development. Like, the character development wasn't particularly interesting to me, especially since it seemed pretty standard for any romances that have one character that's grumpy. Like, that's just kind of the arc that they go through. And then honestly, and I love romance and I love sexy books, I think there were too many sex scenes in these. At some point I felt like every single scene where Vivian and Jules were in the same room together, they were fucking, and it was just a little bit much. Like, genuinely, it was just a bit much. I gave book 1 3 stars, and I gave book 2 2 stars, 2.5 stars. I wasn't a fan. Next, I finished Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. This follows 2 women who are married, and one of them does like exploratory submarine dives for a living, and one time she goes on a trip that is supposed to last 3 weeks and ends up lasting 6 months. Suddenly they turn up again, and she is just like not quite the same. It seems like she's transforming. She's spending a lot of time in the bath, and it's not quite sure what's happening. So it's alternating perspectives. You hear from the submarine explorer's wife in the present, and then you also hear in the past what is happening on the submarine from that woman's perspective. I wish I remembered their names. I'm sorry. I wish this book was more horror. It's kind of was pitched to me, hearing people talk about it, as a literary horror. So like a literary book that has this weird horror speculative aspect. And I think it had that plot, it had the inklings of that. And don't get me wrong, it is a good book. This book didn't need to be more of anything. You know, it was beautifully written for what it was trying to be. I think it did extremely well. Like the writing, the prose, the perspectives, they were well done. I just thought it was going to be more horror and was bored because I don't really like reading like just literary fiction. I love the came back wrong horror trope. I've only read it like once or twice, but I love it. I think it is so creepy and so weird and so ominous, and I wish this book had played with that even more. So I gave this book 3.5 stars, which was purely based on like reading experience enjoyment, in not at all quality of book. So yeah, this was unfortunately not a hit for me, although I will absolutely recommend it to people in my life who I know like literary fiction with like maybe a creepy little sprinkle of a creepiness to it. So yeah, I wish I had liked this one more. Next, I finished The Last Final Girl by Stephen Graham Jones. I was watching back the vlog where I read this, and it really made me realize I need to get better at describing the plots of books, because I don't even tell you what this book is about in that video. So that's great. I just really need to get better at talking about books. So let's talk about The Last Final Girl. This book takes place in a pretty standard suburb in Texas that is struck with tragedy when a Mike Myers style, like, silent slasher killer massacres a group of teenagers. He wears a Michael Jackson mask, so he's known as Billie Jean, and the only survivor of his massacre is like the high school princess. I forgot her name, but she is, you know, a cheerleader. She was dating the quarterback, etc., etc. You know the deal. The main character of this book is Izzy and her best friend Brittany, who are two kind of like more on the outskirts of the student population. They're two weirdos who really, really love slasher movies, and especially like classic horror slasher movies. So this book is full to the brim of references and movies that I need to watch so that I can get the jokes the next time I read it. Izzy, who's obsessed with these movies and knows like the rules of surviving a slasher, is convinced that Billie Jean is coming back and like wants to figure out who it is. Kind of manipulate how the story is going to go. So it is both a slasher and like a love letter to obsessive watching of these classic movies, but it's also a satire of them. As I was reading, I was like, nobody ever talks like this, but it's also exactly how teenagers would talk to each other in a high school slasher movie. It hits all the classic beats: homecoming, parties, murders in the night. And I really, really thought it was interesting, especially how it was written. I say in that vlog that it's written like a screenplay, but I don't really go into depth about what I mean. It's not written like a script where it has like a character's name and then their line and then like stage direction. It's not quite written like that, which I think is what screenplays are more written like. Instead, it's more like they are written in paragraphs like a regular book, but it's not visually described like a book. When you're reading it, it's visually describing like the shots of a movie. So it'll say it cuts to the back of Izzy's head from her perspective as she sees out over the lake, and then it cuts to something else. The view swings around and it'll cut to a different scene, and it kind of intersperses these scenes that way visually through writing. And that's what I mean when I was like, it's written like a screenplay. I really liked it and I gave it 4 stars. Next I read I'm Afraid of Men by Vivek Shraya. This is a very short nonfiction essay, memoir about the author, who's a trans woman of color, her experience throughout her entire life of both loving and fearing men and masculinity and what that meant for her throughout her life at different stages. And I thought it was so thoughtful and well done and touching and interesting, and had a lot of ideas that I hadn't considered before. Obviously, as a white lesbian, I'm not a trans woman of color, so different perspectives, but I thought it was really, really well done. I listened to it in one morning. The audiobook, I'm not exactly sure how long it is, but I listened to it sped up in like 45 minutes, so you can listen to it on the drive to work or walking your dog, which is what I did. I thought it was very well done. I gave it 4.5 stars. Next, I finished The Princess Trap by Talia Hibbert. This is a contemporary romance about a woman and a man who meet and have chemistry, and he asks her on a date, and they start making out in public, and suddenly paparazzi's there taking pictures of him because it turns out he's the prince of a fictional Scandinavian island country. In a panic, he's like, you can't take pictures of us. She's my fiance. And she's kind of backed into the corner of agreeing to be his fiance for 1 year before they can break up and just let it be. But in order to avoid scandal, they need to pretend that they've been together longer than they have, which they have been together 0 because they just met. I ended up really, really loving this book. It is about Cherry and Ruben, and Ruben ended up really growing on me. I have to say, this book and I got off to a really rough start. I was extremely angry at Ruben for kind of being jokey, not quite insensitive, but not really taking how angry Cherry was seriously. That is like a huge pet peeve of mine in all media, but especially books, when you can read their perspective when someone is really upset and mad, and instead of like taking it seriously, the other person is like joking it off in order to deflect. It drives me insane. And I was like, this guy could die and I'd be fine. But he grew on me. There was a recovery, and I absolutely fell in love with him. I think Cherry and Ruben were so sweet. They had a really genuine connection. It was so sexy. I really thought the steam in this was great, which is, I mean, I didn't doubt it. I love Talia Hibbert. So when I wasn't liking the beginning of this book, I was like, what's happening? I've only ever read 3 or 4 Talia Hibbert books, and I loved all of them. So, like, what's happening here? But it was very sexy, and it did have some more serious themes that it ended up dealing with, specifically domestic violence, of which Ruben has been a victim of in the past. And so it was really touching to see Ruben and Cherry communicate about their needs and what they want and their histories and their families, and I ended up really, really liking it. I gave this book like 4.5 stars, 4.25, 4.5. I really liked it, but it wasn't perfect. Then I read another incredibly good book called Just for the Cameras by Viano Oniomoh. I've been talking up this author a lot. I read Sweet Vengeance earlier this year. Twice in February I read it, and I recently put it in my 5 underhyped romances video, which I just put out. I loved this book. It came out like last week. It is a bisexual polyamorous romance, and it is phenomenal. On the cover, you'll see 2 blondes and a guy in the middle. So that's Kian and Jordan are the blondes, and then the guy in the middle is Luca. Kian and Jordan are a couple. They're very much in love, and they have like the equivalent of an OnlyFans, but it's not called that. And they are also both in love with their roommate Luca, the guy in the middle. Luca is also in love with them. So, but none of them can admit it because they have a really good thing going. They're all best friends. They live together. Like, it could get really awkward. And like, what if the other people don't want that? What if they don't want a relationship? What if they're just horny for each other? So, in order to get it out of their systems, or like have what little they can get, which is, you know, of course, romance novel justification, Kian and Jordan decide to invite Luca to be in one of their videos for their OnlyFans. Just the once, just for the camera. And then it keeps happening. They'd make another video, and then they make another video, and it's about pining and love and lust. And I have to say, again, I know I complained during the Sinclair or the Carlisle series about there being too much sex. This book is probably 70% sex, and I loved all of it. Like, it was so good. I love their relationship. I love the feelings between the 3 of them. I love how genuinely they all cared. Genuinely and tenderly, they all cared for each other. It was about found family and community, and it was so good. And I love this author. I'm so excited to have discovered her this year. I can't wait to read all of her books. I think she only has like 2 or 3 backlist books, so I can read all of them soon. I love this. I gave it 4.5 stars. I don't think it was like a 5-star read, but it was definitely like 4.5, 4.75. I thought it was just absolutely spectacular. It had a lot of sex though. I finished the book and I was like, I need a breather. And I was like, I need to pick up a different genre because there was a lot of romance, that was a lot of smut, and I need a second. So I shifted gears into sci-fi, and I read Rogue Protocol by Martha Wells. This is the 3rd book in the Murderbot Diaries series, and I liked it. Not as much as the first 2. I will say I was very confused at the beginning. I am usually pretty good with remembering plots. Like, not that I pride myself on it, but it's something I know about myself. I'm very good at remembering the plots of books. I don't often or really ever have to like reread a book to like remember what was happening so that I can read the sequel. Like, I never do that. And recently I've been doing that a little bit more, but it's for fun because I like the books. It's not because I forget what happened. This, I was like, I don't remember what happened, and I don't remember all these names, and I know it's because it's sci-fi and there's a lot of made up stuff, but I was like confused. Eventually I was like, okay, I remember what's happening, I know what's happening, but it took me longer than I would have liked. This is just probably because I read the 2nd book 2 years ago. It didn't feel like that long, but it was that long, so it's been a while. This book follows Murderbot, a security unit who has hacked its own programming in order to give itself free will and also watch soap operas. And in the first book, you're introduced to Murderbot when they're working as a security unit, and the group of humans that they're protecting is suddenly kind of thrust into almost a murder mystery to discover who has killed researchers on the other side of the planet that they're on. At the end of that book, through a series of events, Murderbot kind of breaks away to go off on its own and investigate its own history, which happens in the 2nd book. And then this 3rd book is a little bit more investigation connected to the 1st book again. And I really liked it. I thought it was a bit more melancholy than the first 2, even though Murderbot is very snarky and a little bit self-hating, which is like, but very funny. And I love a funny, snarky narrator that talks to the reader, which is something that happens in other books that I will be talking about very soon. But I didn't love this one as much as I had hoped. I gave it 3.75 stars. Like, I still really liked it. I really liked the writing. I liked the style of the character. I liked the character voice. I thought the mystery was interesting. But just overall, I wish I had liked it more. However, I read it in basically one sitting, so like, take that with a grain of salt, because I did read it very quickly and I was very engrossed. So maybe I should give it 4 stars. I don't know. But I like Murderbot a lot. I think the thing that really brought me through this book was loving the character rather than really being invested in the mystery, which I was a little bit more in the other 2 books, you know what I mean? And now, the most important things I read this month, which I actually saved one of them all the way till the end to talk about them together. I finished Harrow the 9th and Nona the 9th this month. I love this series more than I can explain with words. This is probably the very first book I finished this month. Harrow the 9th is the second book in the Locked Tomb series. First book is Gideon the 9th, and these follow necromancers and their cavaliers in space. There's politics, there's war, there's lesbians. Everybody's a lesbian. And they're so deeply confusing and chaotic and wonderful, I can't even begin to explain to you. This, I think, is one of the few sequels where I have reread it in order to increase my comprehension, because the first time I read this book, I did not process even half of what happened, which I realized upon my second reading of the book when I was like, that's what happened? I didn't even realize that's what was happening. I love this book. I can't really tell you what it's about, but I can tell you about Harrow. She is grumpy and tiny, and she hates the world, and she's goth. She's also very, very angry and very, very tired. And she's kind of, I can't really say. These is unfortunately a series where like even a little bit of something is a spoiler because they're so involved. And again, maybe this is because I don't really read that much high fantasy, or hard sci-fi. Like maybe I have a different gauge of what's confusing and what's a spoiler. But this series is so intelligently written and so interesting and compelling. And it's all, I mean, it is about the politics and the interactions, but it's so much about the characters, which is just phenomenal. But this book I've read before. I read this book in 2021. I loved it. I gave it 4.5 stars. I'm bumping that up to 5 stars. I think it's so good. Gideon the 9th, the first book, is still my favorite, but that's because I like love Gideon, like beyond love Gideon. But this is so good. I like Harrow. I always liked her, but reading the book and understanding what happened, I love her even more now, and it's so good. So this is a 5-star book. Absolutely 5-star book. And then last night, I finally finished Nona the 9th, which I bought the day after it came out in September of last year. And I wanted to reread the series so that I could read this and understand what was happening, and it took me this long to do it. I also took me all month to read this book. I finished it last night. Today's the 1st, so happy August to Swifties who observe. But I finished this on July 31st, and I started on like, what, the 8th? So it took me all month to read. I fucking loved this book, and I'm gonna give it 4.5 stars, but I'm telling you on reread it's gonna become a 5 because I know myself. This book is so good. Nona is my little baby, and I love her. And she is so dumb. Her head is full of rocks, and I love those rocks. What's amazing about this series is that each book tonally is so completely different, but also in genre is so completely different because they're also so dependent on the perspective and thoughts and attitude and personality of like the narrating character. So Gideon the 9th is this almost like bombastic murder mystery house, haunted house, because it's from Gideon's perspective, and she's just like this huge personality, even though she's kind of shy, but she's very loud and funny in her head, right? Whereas Harrow is basically a psychological horror because she is just tormenting herself at all moments of the day. Whereas Nona is kind of like rompy school dystopian adventure situation because she's just having fun, petting dogs, making friends, you know? Like, she just does that. And it is so interesting. I love the character development in this of the side characters. Tamsyn Muir is insane, and I love her. And this book, I'm talking about it, I sound crazy, so I probably should give it a 5-star. but I just like, I think it has to be a 4.75, and then on reread it'll become a 5-star, because that's just like how these books go, because I need about a full calendar year to process what happened before I can like read it again and then like actually understand what happened. So this book is so good. I don't know if the ratings that I told you verbally just now match up with what's on my spreadsheet, but I'm going to give you the stats for my spreadsheet now. Of those 20 books, 4 of them were 5-star books, 6 of them were 4.5, 5 of them were 4-star books. So that, again, I read 20 books. 15 of them were 4, 4.5, or 5, or somewhere in there. That's insane. Like, that is, like, the average rating for this month is 4.15. A 4.15 average rating for the month, and I read 20 books. I'm so happy. I'm so excited. I love reading. I love books, and I'm in such a fucking good mood. I've also been talking for an hour. This video is an hour. I'm gonna have to edit it. It's gonna be a nightmare. But I'm so happy. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know in the comments what you read this month, if you're planning on reading any of these books, or if you read them. What did you think of them? Tell me. I want to know. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!